Greetings, Grimdark enjoyers. Today I want to talk about rerolls. I want to talk about them, and this time I don't have a formal endpoint I'm trying to convince you of, necessarily. I do have my position on rerolls as a mechanic, but in this one I'm more so looking to share my own reasoning, and where it leads if followed through, and sort of gauge it against the community here on the channel. As for where to begin, it probably makes sense to start with definitions. When I refer to rerolls as a mechanic, I'm referring to rules which let you reroll a dice. Rules like Oath of Moment, or Twin Linked. As for my position on rerolls, well, I've concluded that they are poor. I've come to this position based on considering what dice are for in a tabletop wargame. And there's sort of two fronts to consider. Mechanically, dice are obviously there to serve as our chance metering tool. You roll dice with the intended outcome being modulated based on various stats and values. This is perhaps best exemplified by the attack sequence's save roll. Depending on your unit's armor value, ranging from 2+ to 6+, your saving throw is made less or more likely. But your required result for your saving throw is modified by the attack's armor penetration characteristic, thus abstracting attack quality versus defense quality using a two-factor test filtered by a d6 dice roll. That is the mechanical function of dice on the tabletop. But narratively, or I suppose the narrative consequence of that mechanical application, is that dice are the metric we use to determine whether or not things went well or poorly. Which may sound a bit duh, but I think for the sake of discussing the narrative abstraction of game mechanics, it's an important distinction. The best example of this is probably the attack sequence's hit roll, where 1s always miss and where 6s always succeed. And in some cases, those 6s can yield a critical effect. In this way, it creates a clear narrative through-line. Imagine, in a moment of desperation, 10 guardsmen charge 2 Khorne berserkers. If all of their attacks fail to hit, yikes, those berserkers are gonna butcher. But conversely, if all those attacks hit, things are looking considerably more promising. Furthermore, if you score several 6s to hit, and critical effects like lethal hits are in play, then by God, those guardsmen are poised to bring down 2 traitor Astartes. A legendary feat for a plucky band of mortals. So it seems demonstrably true that dice are not just a mechanical tool to determine chance, but also the narrative mechanism we use to manifest stories out of the tabletop. And you can probably see where I'm going with this. If we add rerolls into the mix, we are drastically skewing the outcome of those moments. Scenarios where things went wrong, those oh shit moments, become far less likely. Which has led me to my position. Much like in vulnerable saves, rerolls are a poor mechanic because they remove moments which would be narrative from occurring. Dice aren't able to rest and describe an unexpected occurrence. This point has sort of come to a head for me through my recent dabbling with Age of Sigmar 4th edition. Now mind you, I've only played a few games, and they were spearhead games, so perhaps my limited experience isn't an accurate representation of the system. But that disclaimer aside, in playing those games I found the absence of rerolls very, very refreshing. And I think if you look at the list of commands in Age of Sigmar, which occupy a role similar to core stratagems in 40k, you can see there isn't a multi-purpose command reroll style stratagem. There's only a single command to reroll the charge roll. And you can also notice the multi-purpose defense and offensive boosters are adding +1 to saving throws and hit rolls respectively. That is to say, they aren't offering rerolls to the player. This to me indicates a very intentional design choice in allowing dice to lie, meaning bad outcomes are allowed to rest and carry through. Now perhaps there are units in specific armies or particular faction rules in Age of Sigmar which completely contradict my inferences here. I'm sure someone in the comments could clarify that, but regardless, it doesn't affect my ultimate point. That it seems to be categorically better to have a game system where rerolls are extremely rare. Now, this position I've arrived at is obviously not without its counterpoints. I'm sure we can all agree that removing, or at least dialing back severely the amount of rerolls that are in a game system would indeed foster a stronger narrative experience through allowing bad outcomes to persist. But on the flip side, it can be narratively jarring to have a unit hard whiff. Though mind you, in those egregious, jarring, narratively unacceptable occurrences, they will usually be in extreme cases. One that comes to mind is when I watched Angron swing his big strikes into a fat squad of Gravis armored marines, and it failed to do anything because he rolled a bunch of ones. My buddy who was commanding Angron was, as one would imagine, rather frustrated by the outcome of those events. But you know what? Isn't that fine? Isn't that the essence of narrative? Is that not the point of playing a dice-based game? That those kinds of chance-based anomalies can occur. Tales will be told of that day, names will be given, all that stuff opens up because of the dice-derived outcomes. So I don't think the concept of limiting rerolls in 40k is a problem in and of itself, though I do suspect that many faction rules and unit rules are predicated on rerolls being available, and that does make the issue much muddier, especially when it comes to things like points costs and relative value of potency per point. We can consider Space Marines as a sort of test example. Oaths of Moment is the big elephant in the room with regards to rerolls. But if we were to change it to give +1 to hit instead of reroll hits, I think it translates rather cleanly. Most of the applications of the intended effect work in a similar capacity. There are second-order features like fishing for crits using your rerolls to hit, but I think that feature is narratively jarring relative to what Oaths of Moment is trying to convey. But fine, if we really must support that, and if the intended effect of the rule were to enable more chances for critical effects, I think just lowering the critical threshold on that rule is a cleaner way to do it. But that's not really the point of what we're talking about here. So yeah, Oaths of Moment can adapt cleanly enough, but let's consider some specific units. The Ballistus Dreadnought's ability lets it reroll when targeting a unit which is above half strength. This could adapt to +1 to hit when targeting a unit above half strength. Easy. But now let's consider a unit that's leaning on rerolls to an even heavier degree. Eradicators reroll hit rolls, wound rolls, and damage rolls when targeting vehicles or monsters. But even here, I think a +1 to hit rolls, wound rolls, and damage rolls when targeting vehicles or monsters is again clean enough. Though there is something to say in that we're already hitting a fail point here in translating the value. Because Eradicators are operating from a position where their value is hinged on rerolling wounds against vehicles and monsters, while perhaps benefiting from Oaths of Moments +1 to wound. And we haven't even gotten to the Gladiator example I had in mind, where we can see a mechanic type offering multiple limited rerolls per roll type, which also doesn't adapt well to a strict replace rerolls with +1 to the result type swap. I guess, like a deep rot, rerolls are just far too ingrained into the system of Warhammer 40k 10th edition. You can't simply Control-F, find and replace rerolls with pluses. Much to my dismay. But I guess as a final point, I'll mention, I don't think rerolls are bad in all cases. I think if used sparingly, the reroll mechanic can be used to abstract the one moment when things are most dire. When you're at a desperate tipping point, when the soldiers are under strict orders for those once per battle, do or die, succeed at all cost scenarios. But when they become ubiquitous, like each and every time a Chaos Terminator attacks, or whenever a Space Marine unit attacks an Oath of Moment target, it becomes problematic. And I suppose that brings this rambly stream of consciousness to a close. What do you think on the rerolls versus dice modifiers conversation here? Are you ultra-based like me and prefer the pluses or minuses to the dice roll? If so, let me know in the comments. Or do you feel different, that rerolls have their place, that they shouldn't be rare? Perhaps there's a narrative argument for rerolls which I didn't consider. So if you got them, drop those in the comments section as well, as I'm more than happy to have my mind changed on the matter. Well, that's a wrap on this one. If you enjoyed this video, there are buttons for liking, sharing, and subscribing. And special thanks to Julius Maximus, as well as my other generous patrons and channel members. Channel members and patrons get early access to regular channel videos, as well as free access to various STL doodads. Just a little something for those who help keep the dream alive.
Save the dream!
Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.